AskReddit, what's the most terrifying thing you've seen in real life? When I was 8 or so, we lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. I was walking out to the balcony a step behind my dad. I had one foot out the sliding glass door, and before I could put my second foot down, the balcony collapsed with my dad on it. There was broken wood everywhere. I thought he was dead. I almost died. Good news, my dad lived, but his legs are messed up. It was the closest I have ever been to dying, and I thought I was watching my dad die. Waking up totally covered in blood. I was walking to class and got hit by a car. I'm not sure what was happened in the moments leading up to it, but I woke up in the middle of the road, cradling my head. I distinctly remember lifting my head and looking at my blood-covered arm, thinking I'll deal with it later, and putting my arm back under my head and going back to sleep. I turned out pretty okay, but I genuinely think the accident made me dumber. My grades slipped hard after the event. Made a throwaway for this because I don't want various people close to me to all see it happened and freak out. I normally only tell it to people I trust who understand. In this case, it was both something I experienced and saw. I had an extremely abusive stepfather when I was young. He was great until my 2 half-brothers, his children, were born. This man was quite a sick fellow, as he seemed to get off on beating me. He was extremely fit for his age, an ex-boxer, and I always had no chance at all. From age 8-15 pretty much I would get my ass kicked by him at least once a week. He even came up with elaborate methods to not leave marks, taken right out of the Guantanamo Bay handbook. For example, he'd force me down, then lay a baseball bat and stand on it on my shins, scooting it back and forth a little. He seemed aroused by hurting me, but never began to inappropriately touch me until I was in my teens. It seemed I had to be old enough to be physically attractive. I don't hate my mother because she was so unhappy with him that she was delusional over it all. She'd even convince herself that boys had beaten me even minutes later. It was terrible to see her mind just breaking from this guy. I would have called CPS, but he treated my brothers, his children, like gods, of course. I didn't want to sell out their future for my own, was the logic in my head back then. It was very fucked up. At the time I believed CPS would collect all 3 of us, which I think is actually true. Now for what happened and what I saw. At age 15 I was finally off home school and into high school. I was also bigger and stronger, and this fellow was realizing he both couldn't get away with beating me and that I'd fight back every time and had gotten amazing at it. I was becoming unworth the trouble in most cases. I loved being at school even though I got picked on. Even the worst day at school as a freshman was heaven compared to when I was at home. One issue arose though: summer break. I knew I was going to really get my ass handed to me on summer break. On top of that, at this age was when he began to see me as a sexual object, and I sure as hell didn't want to get raped. My room at this time was as bare as a hotel room, and I had a typewriter for entertainment. This was around 2000, no computer for me. He'd removed my entire door from the frame because I didn't deserve one. I decided I needed to draw a line at summer break and have a rumble with him. So I reinstalled the door, couldn't find knob, and stuffed shoes beneath it to lock it. I took my own belt and folded it a few times and sat calmly at the edge of my bed around when he'd get home. He noticed the door immediately and began screaming like an animal at me, bashing into it and pressing it to get through. The shoes caught beneath it and stopped, but he began just trying to brute force shove his way through the ajar door. So I charged him and began going to town on his face with the metal end of the belt. This rightly pissed him off, so he broke through and began boxing me in earnest. I didn't really stand a chance and he had me down in about 10 seconds. He knocked the wind right out of me and went for the face after. We began to wrestle on the floor, but I was around his size now and he didn't seem to expect how well I'd do. At one point we both tried to get up and let go of each other. I grabbed for the belt and we wrestled again against my dresser. Then I got it around his neck and he put his hand up and got it trapped against his neck. I began to drag him across the floor like that while choking him, but I could only keep doing it while he was also being dragged. I did it into the hall and down near the bathroom, but he got out of it there and went to town on me again. I remember almost nothing about our fight at that point. I don't know how much longer it lasted or what injuries came from where. I woke up and it was completely pitch black. I felt the worst I'd ever felt. I thought maybe he'd bashed my eyes and blinded me, and I began to feel around. Gradually I realized I was in the bathtub and covered in shards from the sliding glass window. It was extremely difficult to stand. Something seemed wrong with one of my ears and hearing through it, and it also affected my balance. I turned on the light and realized my eyes were okay, but my face and chest were absolutely drenched in blood. I had a broken nose, chipped teeth, and fat hanging from my lip. I had no clue where my stepdad was. I very carefully opened the door and listened and watched the hall. To get out I'd need to pass every single room in the hall, as the bathroom was at the end. I was in shock and terrified. My long sleeve was actually heavy with blood and I had to keep feeling along the wall to walk even a bit cause I kept keeling over. He wasn't in any of the rooms, so I darted from the hall, through the living room, for the front door. This took me past the kitchen, where it turned out he was waiting. At last the long story becomes about what I saw. I saw him stripped down to his boxers, sitting on the kitchen counter, drinking tequila from the bottle. His clothes were on the floor in an open nestled garbage bag. He had ripped the phone from the wall in the kitchen and smashed it apart on the floor. He had a saw from the garage plugged in there as if he tested it once, and he had the most terrified look on his face I'd ever seen, even before he noticed it. It almost doubled when he saw me. To this day I am positive he thought he had killed me in that bathroom. He was planning to chop my body up and hide it. There is absolutely zero doubt in my mind what he would have done if I had not woken up at that time. He was ready to go within a few seconds, maybe a minute at most. What if I hadn't even made it to the door in that time? He called for me to wait, but I bolted out of the door. He didn't chase me at all in the street, and no one was even around to notice me bleeding despite being in the middle of a suburb. It was around 1 p.m. too. I went to a payphone at 1 a.m/p.m. and an employee came out concerned and asking if he should call the cops. I refused and said I was fine, called a teen help hotline. Long story short, I got help down to a youth shelter in the downtown area of where I lived. I gladly chose to live as a bum for the entire summer break and even into the next school year. They even got me some medical care for free, in America of all places. I could make a massive post about all the wonderful things people did for me in that shelter, but I've rambled on enough. This was the happiest time of my life at that point. Reflecting now on my feelings back then, I realize just how massively fucked up that detail is. But it was true. I was so happy to just be a simple hobo than to be at home, because it was that bad. Was taking my dog, Yellow Lab, for a walk with my dad when I was maybe 8 years old. We just started to head back to the house, and about halfway there a bear appears in the middle of the street. The bear was standing on its hind legs, standing about 12 feet tall, looking angry as all hell. My dad put me behind his back upon noticing the cub on the side of the road, because he knew this bear wasn't fucking around if it thought its cub was in danger. Next thing I knew, my dog charged at the bear full speed and tackled it down the hill off the side of the road, and me and my dad both thought that that was the end of our dog, until about a minute later we see our dog strolling up the hill without a scratch on her. She wrestled a bear all the way down the hill and won, and most likely saved mine and my dad's life. Damn, I loved the dog. Not sure whether this makes me fortunate or unfortunate, but the most horrifying thing I've ever seen is completely imaginary. I was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic at 14. Although I first started showing early signs at 7. I hallucinate constantly, visually and audibly, and the actions of my visual hallucinations can cause me pain. I'd assume they can cause pleasant feelings from touch as well, but I've yet to experience that. The entire manifestation of my disease seems to be attempting to make me as miserable as possible, and is almost like another entity in my head. That being said, most of my visual hallucinations are human-like figures, entirely black and lacking any real defining features. They don't resemble anyone I know as far as I can tell. They do, however, seem to enjoy making me as uncomfortable as possible by just leering endlessly. They're always there, usually just watching me. It feels like I'm being criticized constantly on every movement, every action. It's made me incredibly self-conscious over the years. Anyway, I was sitting in my room at the age of 15. It was late at night. My family had been asleep for hours. Suddenly I heard a loud thud behind me. I'd been hallucinating for a couple of years at this point and didn't think anything of it, assuming it was another fake bump in the night. Then I felt a hand over my mouth, and a swift, sharp, agonizing pain in ribs. Still to this day I consider it the most painful thing I've ever felt. The feeling of the hand left my face and my head collapsed onto my laptop. I grabbed my side, which felt warm and wet. I saw a shadow slip out my bedroom door as my vision became blurry and the room started to spin, and for a full 20 minutes, I could not move. I was in too much pain. My body was going into shock. I managed to peek down at my side and it appeared I was bleeding heavily. I could feel the blood running down my body and hear it dripping onto the carpet. My mind was racing with thoughts of my family being murdered. I heard my dogs barking wildly, unable to get to the intruder as we'd installed a door at the end of the hallway to the back of the house, so the cats could have some peace from them. My heart pounded louder than I could deal with. I heard screaming of how much of a failure I was, how I was a complete idiot, that it was all my fault that my family had been killed. Tears rolled down my face, and finally I let out a scream of some sort. A few moments later my sister opened my door, turned on the light, and the nightmare vanished. The pain in my ribs dulled significantly but still burned. I lifted my head from my keyboard and the pool of blood below me was gone. I pulled my hands from my side and they were suddenly clean and dry. My sister looked at me with a worried expression, asking what was wrong, wondering why I was bawling and screaming at 2 a.m. I sobbed even harder and all I could offer as an explanation was I'm just insane. That was the night I realized I would have to deal with this for the rest of my life. That I would experience traumas and stresses that never existed for the rest of my life. That I would question the motive and intention of every single person, relative or stranger, for the rest of my life. But hey, at least in the end, most of my fears and worries end up being made up. Worked as a healthcare security officer in a rather large locked psychiatric ward. One day I was leaving dispatch and happened to catch on our old black and white monitor a man sitting in the middle of the main floor. Something struck me as wrong. Suddenly I saw a black puddle beginning to form under the man. I go running up to the unit, and there sat a man in a puddle of blood. I called for backup, but he stood up and ran at me. I fought this guy for about 5 minutes, both of us covered in blood. His eyes were dead, like a shark's. Turns out he had sat in the floor, and ripped out the stitches the ear had put in after a suicide attempt. Catching a methed-out young woman rummaging through tools in my dad's garage. The face she gave me when she realized a larger male had confronted her in a confined space was one of pure terror, and she was ready to claw my eyes out to survive what she most likely perceived as a threat. When she turned to run out of the garage, my police officer dad caught her by the arm and held her down until the police arrived. Watching her fight, beg, and plead that we won't rape her or kidnap her was pretty heartbreaking when we had the best intentions in mind of getting professionals to handle her drug-infused meltdown. The struggle was strong enough that we decided we should handcuff her to keep her from hurting herself or us. Come to find out later, she was on the run and being chased by police because she thought she was being chased and in danger of being kidnapped inside of a hotel. We were her worst nightmare in her mind, and it sure as hell looked like it. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you liked today's video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for future videos. If you want more right now, click on one of the cards on the screen to watch another one of my videos. Thanks again for watching. Please stay safe everyone, until next time.